Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cosmos with an interview on the phenomenology of autism. I am Jack Baines, a recent theology graduate, and also I'm highly functioning autistic. When I heard that fellow philosophy graduate Jonah Powley had written a dissertation on the phenomenology of autism, I was surprised. My first question, thus, is to give a brief overview of your dissertation.
Sure. So I was, yeah, like you said, I was looking at the phenomenology of autism. Particularly, I was looking at what I would call an autistic phenomenology of disorientation. So I'll break it down into two ways. So phenomenology is a word that many people probably haven't heard of. It's quite a long word. It's quite fun to say if you can get it right. But essentially, phenomenology is the philosophy of lived experience. So it's kind of what is it like for me to experience the world? Um, this is something that everyone has their own experience of the world, and it's kind of about looking at kind of the world from that experiential kind of first person point of view. There's a really important concept going forward here, which is called embodiment, which is something that phenomenologists like to talk about a lot. Embodiment, essentially, the idea that our experience of the world is fundamentally from that within which a body. So if you think of any experience you have, like me right now, looking into this camera, whether you're watching this video, whether you're walking, eating, doing any activity, that's always done in a body, right? And so it's that concept of embodiment is recognizing that the body is central to our experience of the world. Um, and so that's a really important concept. But kind of applying it here to autistic phenomenology, it's really important to recognize that different bodies have different experiences of the world. If we look at taking that idea and applying it to autism, particularly looking at two different kinds of experience, what I call disorientation. So this is this experience of the world which kind of is it's kind of it's disorienting. It's your experience of the world is uncomfortable. You don't really feel at home in the world. You might feel lost. Um, in fact, the example of being lost is a really good example of that because your world changes. Like if you're navigating a city, and suddenly you don't know where you are, that what might before been quite a fun adventure suddenly becomes this really kind of disconcerting experience where suddenly you don't know where you are in the world, and that this kind of displacement and getting lost is what I looked at with autism. I guess looking at it both in its sensory point of view. So autistic people tend to have challenges with sensory experience. So you might be hypersensitive to noise or bright lights. And so looking at kind of how autistic people are disoriented in that way, but also in what I call structural disorientation, which is this disorientation when kind of the world is chaotic, not because it's kind of sensorily overwhelming, but because things aren't going kind of following a set structure or aren't going according to a certain plan. And so I was looking at those two kinds of disorientation in autistic experience.
Chord. So, wow, that's a good answer. Wow, quite interesting. Um, Very quickly, how does one's orientation of autistic phenomenology relate to one's faith?
Sure. I think there are kind of two things I would pull out here. I guess the first is kind of on the kind of thinking kind of cognitive, at least here. There's been some research done which suggests that autistic people tend to have a concept of God, which is quite distinct from neurotypical, which just means kind of people who aren't autistic kind of aren't autistic, aren't neurodivergent. And autistic people tend to have a different concept of God, or can at least. This isn't a by no means a universal finding, but it was that was really interesting, particularly because what it means is that autistic people, when they go to church and they're in congregations, they're at risk of having a lack of cognitive engagement with their faith because they're in an environment where the people who they're with believe different things to them, and that kind of creates a possibility of cognitive dissonance as well. Um, and so it leads to a lot of autistic people having to like kind of in my example, I find using theological resources kind of outside of what I'm doing at church, outside of that, to be really helpful for me because I don't necessarily find that engagement within church because kind of how I think about God or my faith is different because I think about the world differently. Um, the other thing I wanted to really kind of point out with the dissertation is actually it reveals kind of an implication for the whole church, actually. I think kind of thinking about phenomenology to me has revealed kind of the importance of the body in worship. So you get stuff like in Paul in 1 Corinthians says that the body is the temple for the Holy Spirit. I think kind of phenomenology offers us a really powerful way to realize actually anyone, be autistic or not, whether you're like worshiping and you're kind of raising your hands, or in prayer, you're kind of clasping them together, or even just kneeling, all those different actions are bodily actions. Um, and that kind of helps open up your experience of God. Like Paul says, the body is the temple. And so for me, it was through doing the phenomenology that I help me properly realize that. And so kind of I hope that kind of that finding isn't kind of limited to autistic people, but there are also things kind of for the whole church population to take from that.
Nice.
That is very fascinating to hear. Question three, then. Would like to know what kind of things do autistic people like me and you need to focus on regarding faith?
Sure. I think again, there's one kind of important thing to say before I get into this, which is that every person's autistic experience is different. Kind of people might be aware of the concept of neurodiversity, which is the idea that everyone's experiences are different, but even within neurodiversity, there is still diversity. So there's quite a common adage, which is kind of if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Like it's kind of you can't generalize the whole population there. But I can say things that I found helpful as an autistic Christian. Particularly I focus on worship here. But I guess you can look at the sensory and the structural, which is what I focus with my dissertation on as well. You get a lot of autistic people which are hypersensitive to noise. That's something I personally have. And so it means that actually kind of when it comes to worship, there are some worship settings that I don't find that comfortable. So kind of like loud mega church music or such things, I kind of struggle to deal with. But if it's something quieter, like kind of a meditative prayer or something like Lectio Divina, or just a practice of solitude, I find that much more comfortable, much easier for me to engage in worship than those other things. But equally, there are some autistic people who might actually prefer louder music. And so in those cases, you might kind of find it kind of more comfortable to kind of worship in accordance with kind of the participatory kind of loud nature of like some psalmic music, where you kind of like you're using loud instruments to praise God. So kind of both of those are very valid ways of worshiping, but it very much depends on your body, right? And so how your body worships God and how kind of you're able to connect with that. So yeah, it depends on the person, but those are some things that I found helpful.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, for my fifth and final question, what I would like to ask you, Jonah, is what would you say to organizations who want to try and make services adaptable for people with disabilities and people on the spectrum? Because I'm almost about to start working for a charity who one of the things that they do is they do run services every once a month in a program they call WAVE, as in We Are Valued Equally. I think you wanted to research about them actually for the sake of this question. I want to know if there is what you have to say on that.
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. I think the first thing is the considering of how a space is designed and how a space is experienced by autistic people. I think the first thing is kind of like I said earlier, you need to recognize that autism is wildly heterogeneous, and so you can't designing on autistic friendly space. It's not a simple matter. It's very complex, very challenging. There are loads of different needs you need to take into account. So that's something that's really important when considering the designing um, of space. I guess one other thing as well is actually recognizing that actually sensory and structural disorientation, we don't exist in isolation of each other. They actually can coexist together. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. I find stimming or kind of what are called self-stimulatory bodily movements, or kind of like whether it's like fiddling with something or kind of moving your leg in a particular way, in a repetitive way, or however that you find that kind of movement serves to regulate an experience that might be chaotic or overwhelming. I find stimming really comfortable, but then when I kind of feel the pressure not to be able to stim, I find it hard to then also regulate my sensory environment. So that structural disorientation that I got from not being able to stim or kind of feel structurally kind of connected or kind of whole in a way, then also plunged me into a kind of a sensory chaos as well. And so those two things are strongly connected. And so it's kind of, that's also a really important consideration. So kind of designing spaces which kind of are both kind of help centrally orient autistic people, but also structurally orient them, and in a way which kind of the two combined also kind of help benefit those autistic people.
Jonah, thank you so much. That was honestly an interview to die for. That was amazing. Again, if any of you want to be interviewed as well on a theological topic, do send a message to the Instagram handle ToTheCosmos 7. And yes, I really hope you enjoy this week. Jonah, and everyone for listening to this video. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for hundreds of views, and see you later. Bye!